Hi, and welcome to our first ever Wednesday Yield Theory Society. Every Wednesday, we're going to talk about how you can become the best possible version of yourself and how you can meet others where they are and help them in the way that works and is most effective for them. Look, anyone who's familiar with my work or familiar with my family knows that this past year, my wife has been battling breast cancer. She's gone through chemotherapy, she's gone through surgery, she's gone through radiation. She is a warrior in every sense of the word. And anyone out there who's gone through something similar knows that that word battle means battle. But my wife and I have lived our entire lives and through our whole relationship, focusing on gratitude for what we do have rather than being focused on what we don't have. And in every given moment, we look at what can be done, what we can do. And recently we were talking, and she said, look, for years, people have written in and asked to meet with you one on one. And because of your travel schedule, you haven't been able to do that. But what if we look at this as an opportunity for you to connect with what you love doing, meeting one on one with people? And so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to take one day a week and I'm trying to travel less so that I can be around more for my wife. And I'm going to see people one on one, do online coaching. So if that's something you're interested in, we'll have a calendar set up for you so you can figure out the dates and times that are open. But in the meantime, feel free to just reach out through my website at drchristianconte.com. Now, let's begin with this Wednesday Yield Theory Society. And I thought, let's start with this topic: why people don't take your advice. I mean, think about it. You know your advice is good, so why don't people listen? Why don't they take it? Well, let's break it down. I want to begin with you being the recipient of advice, because sometimes when you see why people aren't doing what you're asking, it makes more sense when you feel it. So let's imagine this. Let's imagine that this football represents my advice, and you're struggling, and you ask me for advice. So I give you the advice. And then when you go to grab it from me, I don't let go. And I say, here, take the advice. And you don't let go. And I say, take it. And you don't let go. And I still hold on to it. And you keep trying to tug it away. And I won't let it go. Now, if that looks ridiculous or sounds ridiculous, it's actually no different than if I were to give you advice and let's say you didn't take it, and then I got mad at you and I got upset with you. So now you have your original problem that you came to me with. And now, because I gave you advice and got upset when you didn't take it, you now have this problem to deal with as well. So not only do you have your original problem, but you have another problem on top of it. Now, if you could feel what that would feel like to say, come on, because the truth is, the reason why you might not have taken my advice is maybe you were not ready, willing, or able to take that advice. And that's the reality for all of us. You see, when we're struggling, again, let's do this through you. If you're struggling with an emotional issue, and we were to do just a brain scan, what we would see is as you were emotional, you would be processing that event in the middle of your brain in what's called the limbic system. So you'd be in the emotional center of your brain. And then I would come along, and because I wasn't emotionally connected to the issue, I could be looking at it from the frontal cortex, the higher level thinking center of our brains. Now, from that perspective, not having any emotional involvement, I get to say, well, just do this, just do that, just don't do this, just don't be anxious, just don't be angry. And you can feel, because I'm sure you've experienced it in your life, where someone was really invalidating and tells you, well, just don't be upset, as if you're going to say, oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. Now, I say that lightheartedly, but the reality is that every time we give people advice that they're not ready, willing, or able to take, and we get mad or upset with them because they didn't listen, we are no different than the foolish person who insists to give advice but holds on to it. So, what can you do? Well, yield theory is all about meeting people where they are. And that's not just some fancy bumper sticker phrase. To meet people where they are means to meet them precisely in where they are ready, willing, and able to take in information. Now, it's not rocket science to figure this out, but it is neuroscience. In other words, to meet people where they are is to understand, listen, what have you tried? Let's begin with that. What have you tried? Because now you get a baseline to hear what they've done rather than talking at them. What has worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? Have you considered this? What do you think might work if you did this? What might not work? What kind of obstacles do you have? To be able to truly meet people where they are, it's about understanding what they have tried, what they're ready, willing, and able to do. See, a lot of times when people ask for advice, they don't want advice. They just know that it's socially acceptable that if they're going to phrase an issue, it will be more palatable if they tell you that they're actually seeking advice. But they might not be ready to change in any way whatsoever. That's why one of the best things that you can learn in life are Prochaska and DiClemente's stages of change. And the stages of change were originally designed for dealing with addiction. If you're struggling with addiction, it was a great way to phrase or frame understanding the process of change that people go through. But the reality is that the stages of change are applicable to every time we make a change. A matter of fact, they're applicable in all our communications. That's why they are a big part of yield theory. So I'm going to do a much more detailed account of the stages of change on Patreon. So in this video, I'm going to give you a condensed version of everything. But if you'd like to see a little bit longer explanation where we really dive into this, then please check out Patreon. But let's begin with this. The stages of change are pre contemplation. In other words, we're not even thinking about change. So someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, doc, you need to lose weight." And I say, "Why?" "I like pizza and I like to eat junk food." And then the next stage of change is contemplation, where I'm thinking about making a change, but I'm not really ready to make that change. So they say, "Hey, doc, you need to lose weight." And I say, "Yeah, I probably do, but I really like pizza and snack food." Then the next stage of change is called preparation, where I'm making small changes. So I might say, "Yeah, I cut back every now and then. I might have one fewer slices of pizza." And then there's the action stage where I'm actually changing. I'm eating healthily, diet, exercise, I'm all in. Now, the reality is that when I teach these stages of change, I often use a football field. Because if you can imagine that on one end zone, it represents pre contemplation, not even thinking about changing. And the other end zone, 100 yards away, represents action, where the person's actually changing. Well, if you can imagine that when someone asks for advice, if they are not really even thinking about them doing anything differently, because oftentimes when people ask for advice, what they're really doing is complaining and talking about how the world should be different, not them. So let's say someone asks for advice, but they're down in pre contemplation on one end zone and you approach them right away with the answer of exactly what you think they should just do. Well, that would be no different than you standing on the other goal line, 100 yards away, and whispering what they should do. When you see it in that context, it becomes really silly because you think, why would you whisper when the person's way down there? And that is a great representation of, to truly meet people where they are, you have to have the self discipline to leave where you are and go meet them where they are. "Well, they should be more aware, doc. They should want to change more." Well, here comes that word should. Again, if you're familiar with yield theory at all, you understand the difference between what I call the cartoon world, which is our world of shoulds. People should think, feel, believe, and behave the way I think they should. And then the real world, how people actually think, feel, believe, and behave. And as long as we align our expectations with our cartoon world, we're let down. Or in the case of giving advice, if we expect that the person we're speaking with should be further along the stages of change, then we're really let down when they're not. It's one of the reasons, it's the exact reason actually, why you might get upset if someone doesn't take your advice or your feedback. You get upset because you say they should have been open to it. They should want to do what they asked me about. And that should is precisely what gets you upset. In fact, I tried to come up with a math equation once, and I said, um, the amount of degree with which you believe something should happen minus the reality of it actually happening or divided by it somehow gives you the intensity of the anger you experience. The point is this: the more you align your expectations with your cartoon world, the more upset you are when you experience the real world and it's different. But that's why I've spent more than a quarter of a century teaching people how to align their expectations with reality. Because the more you can meet people where they are in regard to what they're ready, willing, and able to do, the more receptive they will be to the advice or words that you have to offer. So, two things when it comes to giving advice. One, be mindful of a person's stage of change. What are they ready, willing, and able to do? Are they ready to change? Are they simply thinking about changing, but they're not ready to do anything? Oftentimes, and this is probably pretty common, but when people first talk about something, they're not really looking for what they can do differently. They want you to validate how they feel and maybe help them complain a little bit about how other people should be different. Now, that's all well and good, and there's nothing wrong or bad about doing that. But at the end of the day, well, in the history of humanity, you are the only person who has unrestricted, unfiltered access to your mind, which means if your mind is a place of peace, keep doing what you're doing. But if your mind is a place of chaos and turmoil, angst and anger, well, you're the only one who can change it. And since we all know that you are the only person you can control, then the reality is that if you want something to change, you have to be that change. Now, again, if someone's in a stage of change where all they want to do is complain and be heard, wonderful. Be it, let them vent and get it all out, and you can be a wonderful source for them. But if they're in a space where they just want to vent and you start talking at them about what they should do differently, well, that's when you get into a whole lot of trouble. For those of you who are familiar with my Fool on the Mountain story, that's where this really comes into play. In brief, there was a fool who was charged with leading a group of people up a mountain. So he ran really fast. He got to the top of the mountain, and when he looked around, everybody was at the bottom. So he started to scream at them, "You should be up here with me. I had it tough. I started down there and I made it up here." But they couldn't even see him, let alone hear him. So he became known as the Fool on the Mountain. And the reality is that if he really wanted to lead those people, and he was up there and they were down there, then the only thing he could do is have the self discipline to leave where he was and go meet them where they are. Now, this might seem like some far off story about a distant land and place, but the reality is that every time you and I demand, even in our own minds, that people should be further along the stage of change than they are, we're no different than the Fool on the Mountain. Now, you're not wrong and bad for having a cartoon world. In fact, it's often pretty reasonable, pretty logical. But I call it a cartoon world because it's as fictitious. It's
An imaginative world.
it's not real. So the reality is that if you expect your cartoon world to unfold, you're going to be really let down when it's not. Applying this to advice means this: people don't, if they don't take your advice for this reason. You're not likely meeting them in the stage of change where they are. You're not likely assessing where they are in terms of their own cartoon world thinking. So not only do you have a cartoon world, but they do too. In their cartoon world, they might say, "I shouldn't have to change. I shouldn't have to do anything differently, and the world should change for me. And that's no different than the fool on the mountain who says, I shouldn't have to go back down there. They should come up here. But the reality is, if they don't know their way, and the only path is for him to go down and meet them where they are, then that's exactly what needs to happen. If people aren't taking your advice and you're struggling with that personally, and you really want to understand what kind of factors go into maybe what you're putting in between you and others, or if you want to get a better understanding of maybe why you're holding on to your advice when you go to hand it to others, well, that's a great topic for online one on one coaching. And again, now that's a possibility. I hope this helps. Every Wednesday, you're going to get a video from this channel. Until next Wednesday, until next time, as always, I wish you much peace.